There we go. Okay, everybody can hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. It is, the time change is a little gruesome. It's,
hate
that's
it
why we
too.
had to
Oh, yeah.
push it to 8 o'clock tonight because it's it's now 5 o'clock in the morning. We don't change the times. In the secular country of America, and they, give us plenty of time to acclimate before Pesach night, and clocks change in a normal time. And here in the Jewish country of the land of Israel, we change clocks Thursday night, Erev Pesach. Anti-Semites. They, if they would only wait a week, the Seder could be early, and and life could be great. But they do
Is
it.
it that way every year? Or do they do it always right before Pesach?
They have a certain time, and this year Pesach falls out like that. But,
Yeah, I see.
But it's almost always before Pesach. Almost always before Pesach, and it's like, but not before Pesach. Like they give you 2 weeks to get right before Pesach. So, whatever. It's all good. At least that's what they say. Okay. So tonight's Mishnah is a very important Mishnah, and I think we have some important things to accomplish tonight. Mishnah says as follows: Kol mizakes harabim, that anybody who is mizakes harabim, mizakes harabim is a special term which means to give an advantage to the community. It means to teach Torah, to do chesed, to do things for other people, where other people are going to get an advantage from what you do. It's not just that you do nice things, and it's not just that you're a good person or a learned person, but you're mizakes harabim, that what you do is something is at an advantage to other people. A person gets involved in a chesed organization or a chesed thing, so that other people get something from it. A person who dedicates something to and other people get the benefit from it. That's a mizakes harabim. It's not just the person who does mitzvos on their own, but it's a person who carries other people on their shoulders. And it doesn't mean the performance of the mitzvah of tzedakah, right, or of another specific community-related kind of mitzvah. But again, it's a person who does something that other people get an advantage from it. So such a person who is mizakes harabim, we'll give you examples in the Mishnah. He's going to give us examples of a mizakes harabim. But a person who's a mizakes harabim, ein chet ba al yado. So then sin does not come to his hands. That means that person does not sin. The person is protected. Now we're going to talk about that in a few minutes, because I know what that means. That a person is protected from sin. What, God takes away your free choice? How's it possible? The person will be protected from sin. You're not going to sin. I mean, who wouldn't want that guarantee? But how could God give you that guarantee if there is a thing called bechira in this world? There's a thing called free choice in this world. Then you're always free to choose to sin. How could you say just because you're a good person and you're being mizaki, you're pumping up other people, so then now you never sin? I don't know. How does that work? Okay, we'll get there. V'kol hamachti es harabim, and anybody who causes other people to sin. There is a concept of you sinning, right? A person does an avera, transgression, but there's also a concept of where you sin, it drags other people down. Where you drag other people down, so then that's called a machti es harabim. You're causing other people to sin. God has no tolerance, as we're going to see. God has no tolerance for that. That is on the lowest level of humanity. We say that that Yashka. Right, there's a whole discussion about whether we killed him, whether we didn't kill him, and we did not kill him. We could not kill him, and the reason that we couldn't kill him is because the Sanhedrin wasn't operating on that level, and because it wasn't operating on that level, so then therefore we couldn't put him to death. But we would have, had we gotten our hands on him, because he fit this category of not only a chote, if he in fact lived, but that's for a different time. Not everyone believes that he in fact lived and started this religion. According to many, it was his disciples, because according to everybody, it was his disciples that started the religion, but that his disciples started the religion without him actually ever having lived or done the things necessarily that that was purported in his name. But be that as it may, it doesn't. Now is not a class in theology and in comparative religion, but the at the end of the day, if he lived and did the things that was said that he did, then he wasn't just a chote, he wasn't just a sinner, he was a machtias rabbim, somebody who was trying to drag other people down, somebody that tries to convince somebody not to keep a mitzvah, somebody that teaches somebody not to keep a mitzvah, or a perverted way of keeping a mitzvah. That's called not only a chote, a sinner, but a machtias rabbim, somebody who causes other people to sin. A habitual talker in shul, right? Somebody goes. I'm not just talking about somebody that turns to a neighbor and says something, but somebody who goes and makes it their almost like their profession to talk in shul. They go around from place to place to place. They engage in a conversation here, engage in a conversation there, with people that wouldn't normally talk in shul. So then that person is in this category of person called a chote, umachtias rabbim, a sinner, and somebody who causes other people to sin. Okay, that person is ein maspikin biyado lasos tshuva. That person is never going to be able to do tshuva. That's going to be a blockage that stands in front of that person, and that person is not going to be able to enter into the realm of doing tshuva, of repenting. Okay, now, and again, that's going to have to be explained. The Mishnah then goes on to give us examples. Moshe, Zocha v'zikas harabim. Moshe was Zocha himself, merited v'zikas harabim, and he supported the community, and many people hung on him. Zechus harabim talibo. So the merits of the entire community were on him. Shenemar, as it says, Tzidkas Hashem u'mishpatav im Yisrael, that the righteousness of God and the justice with the Jewish people, and that we understand because he was mizaka them, because he supported them, then he was protected from sin. And ein chet ba biyado, so the chet, sin, did not come to his hands. Okay, now the fact that you're all quiet and I just got away with that means that either 8 o'clock is too late at night to have shiurim, or you just.
I want to ask. I couldn't find my unmute.
So what am I talking about?
Why was he protected? If he's protecting the sin, why did he hit the rock and all that kind of stuff?
Why did he hit the rock? Why did Moshe Rabbeinu turn to the people and say to them, Shimona Amayrim, listen to me, you rebellious people? What in the world does this Mishnah say? Like, the Mishnah is doing this with a straight face, and it thinks it can get away with it? Like, what's going on? How do you make such a statement that a person who helps the community is never going to sin? Like Moshe. Oh, like Moshe. Thank you very much. What does that mean? Okay, we'll get back to it. I call that the elephant in the room in this Mishnah, and this elephant is like the size of New Jersey. Like it's not just an elephant. The statement doesn't even make any sense. Oh, it will, but at the moment it doesn't. Okay, let's continue. And then the Mishnah gives an example of somebody who's a chote and a machte, somebody who's a sinner and caused other people to sin. And the Gemara says, the Mishnah says, Yeravam chote v'hichtias rabim Jeroboam. Right, Yeravam, we'll talk about him in a second. He sinned and he caused other people to sin. Chet harabim talibo. He was taken to task for the community's sin, and the everybody's sin hung on him. Shenemar al chatos Yeravam asher chata v'asher hechtias Yisrael, because of the sins of Yeravam, that he sinned and he caused other people to sin, and he wasn't able to do tshuva. Okay, let's talk about Yeravam for a second. There was a fellow by the name of King Solomon. King Solomon had a son by the name of Rechavam. Right? They ran out of syllables, so they seem to keep these things going. Rechavam, Yeravam. Okay, but there was a fellow by the name of Rechavam, and he was running the country. He had advisors that told him that he should not tax the people as much as his father did, because his father could get away with it. His father was beloved. His father was incredible. He is not going to be able to get away with it in the same way, and therefore it would be better if he did not, if he backed off some of the taxes. He had his young advisors that he was close to, who told him, if your father can get away with it, so could you. Tax the people. And he listened to the younger advisors. That in itself was a major blunder, terrible mistake, because at the end of the day, our rabbis tell us from this incident that if the youngsters tell you to build, to destroy, and the elders tell you to the other way around, if the youngsters tell you to build, and the elders tell you to destroy, then you should listen to the elders, because the destruction of the elders is building, and the building of the youngsters is destruction. In other words, that people that have a history, people that have a larger outlook, people that have a bigger picture outlook, even if they tell you to destroy something. In other words, even if they look at something and say, we need to stop this, we need to change this, their change is really ultimately building. But very often when you get, new people, new energy, and they without any perspective and without any connection to the past and what was, they look at it and say, oh, we need to change this, we need to build this. That building is actually destruction. Because even though it looks like progress, but it's not progress, in fact, because it's not building off of the shoulders of the past. It's not standing on the shoulders of giants, but it's rather trying to start something new, which newness is a good thing, but sometimes newness is in fact really destruction, because it's not carrying on something that, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's not carrying on something that's good. His advisors told him, the advisors with perspective and the advisors with a picture, they told him that he shouldn't take taxes. In other words, basically destroy. But that destruction would have actually been rebuilding, because that would have given strength to people and confidence in the king, and there wouldn't have been a rebellion. Well, there was a rebellion. The rebellion was so thorough, and it was so devastating that they took on this fellow by the name of Yeravam ben Nevat to lead the rebellion, and there was a split in the community of Israel. I know I've spoken about it before, but I want you to understand the drama of this, the hugeness of it. For close to 300 some odd years, there were two countries of Israel. It wasn't that one was an Arab state and one was a Jewish state alongside it. There were two Jewish states side by side, without any communication and with cooperation between the two. It's like a shul and a breakaway shul, and living right next door to each other. It's just hard to imagine that you had cousins living in the other Israel who you couldn't see. You had family members that were in the other Israel, and that you couldn't be connected to them. You couldn't spend Yontif together because you couldn't get over the border. It was so dramatic that where was the Beis HaMikdash? There was only one Beis HaMikdash, and that Beis HaMikdash was in Israel, was in the kingdom of the south. The kingdom of the north was really like the breakaway kingdom. It was larger. It was comprised of 10 tribes, 10 and a half tribes. It was a much larger country. And the kingdom of the north, this king Yeravam had a dilemma, because what's going to happen come Pesach? Everyone's going to want to go down to the Beis HaMikdash in order to be able to make their sacrifices. But when they go down to the temple to make their sacrifices, so then they're going to want to stay, because that's where the temple is, that's where the holiness is. And he had to do something. He had a bigger dilemma. Only a king is allowed to sit in the courtyard of the temple. He wasn't the real king of Israel, because the king of Israel was from the tribe of Judah, and he wasn't from the tribe of Judah. Now, he made himself king of the kingdom of the north, but he wasn't a technical king. When it came time to be in the temple courtyard where the entire nation was there, so then he wasn't going to be able to sit down. That's tremendous humiliation. that he fears as a king. He holds himself as a king, and he's not going to be able to sit inside of the temple. All you need is one holiday, and he becomes completely discredited. He was a quick thinker. So what he did was he prohibited his people from going to the south. Now, you can't take away Pesach. I'm using Pesach as an example, Sukkot, Shavuos. You can't take that away from the Jewish people. So he created a new system of holidays, and he built 2 temples for them. One in a place called Beit El, and one in a place called Dan. Now, you can actually see the remnants of the temple that he built in Dan. There's a place up north near the border with Lebanon that is called Tel Dan. It's a nature preserve. It is perhaps one of the most beautiful places in all of Israel. It's got waterways and forests, and it's stunning. When you walk out of this whole waterway area, you walk to a archaeological dig, and part of that archaeological dig is the remnants of the temple that Yerovam built to whatever, where he did the sacrifices, and it's just an incredible piece of history. All of the Yerovam was willing to prohibit the Jews from going to the temple because he was worried about his own honor. The Gemara says that God once came to Yerovam and he said to him, listen, let's me, you, and King David go for a walk in the Garden of Eden. In other words, God gave him the opportunity to do tshuva. And he asks the following question to God. Mi barosh. Who's going to lead the parade? And God says to him, who do you think? King David. He said, thank you very much. I'm not interested. Because he was so taken up with his own covet and his own honor, he was willing to drag down an entire nation because of his kavod. That is a quintessential chote. He himself sinned, and he was machti es harabim. He brought people down. Again, I go back to my example of a person who is a talker in shul, who has no regard for themselves, but also has no regard for other people. A chote umachti es harabim. It's one thing when a person sins in private. Okay, whatever, it's bad, but you did whatever you do. But when you do it in a way that other people are going to learn from it, that's already something that's considered the lowest. And God says on a person like that, so that person is going to be very difficult for a person to do tshuva. Why is it going to be so difficult for a person to do tshuva? The Mishna puts it that it's impossible to do tshuva, because to do tshuva, you have to be aware of yourself. That person is so not aware of themselves, so not self-aware, because they don't even recognize the damage that they're doing to other people, what they're causing other people to do. And therefore, for that person, it's going to be very difficult to do tshuva. So what do we get out of this Mishnah on the surface? I'm not going to leave you there, but what do we get from this Mishnah? That this Mishnah is saying that a person who carries other people on their back for good, who lifts up other people, that person is like a protected species. A person who has no regard for other people and no regard for what might happen to somebody else. Look, for me, I don't care, but I don't care about you either. That person is on the lowest level of Judaism. Okay, it's a good lesson. It's important to know that you have to be consciously aware of the effect that you're having on other people. If I do this, how is this? What was this going to teach and to say to somebody else? How is this going to uplift somebody else? Those are important. It's an important thing, an important way to live. That is not just about me, but it's about the effect that I'm having on others. But what's that lesson? What's the Mishnah really trying to tell me? My biggest problem is the Moshe thing. That how can you tell me that a person who does good stuff and lifts up the Jewish people that person is protected and the person is never going to come to sin. Because how do we explain Moshe? And it's not just Moshe, by the way. It's there are many examples. You remember we spoke about a guy by the name of Acher, the other guy. He was a rabbi by the name of Elisha ben Avuya. He's a very holy man. He was married. He was the Rebbe of Rabbi Meir, and he was a person he knew everything. Rabbi Meir was the greatest rabbi of his time. His Rebbe was an apostate by the name of Acher. They would never say his name. One time in the Talmud it tells his name, and then the rest of the time they call him, they speak to him, they say his name is Acher, the other guy, Mr. X. Right? They would never say his name. And why wouldn't they say his name? Because he became the worst of apostates. On Yom Kippur, he was riding on a horse, eating behind the Holy of Holies in the temple. It takes a little bit of chutzpah. And he was once walking with Rabbi Meir, and he turns to Rabbi Meir and he says to him, "Stop here, because it's Shabbos. I'm on my horse. I'm riding. You and I are talking Torah, but you can't walk past here because this is the end of the Shabbos boundary." And he wouldn't let Rabbi Meir walk past. Well, Acher also was a tremendous sinner, and yet he was a person who taught Rabbi Meir. He was the support of Rabbi Meir, and he brought all this incredible Torah into the world. And he sinned. How can you tell me that a person who not only does things himself, but who helps others, who lifts up others, that the person's protected from sin? They're not protected from sin. Okay. There are those that want to answer the question by Moshe, and they want to say that Moshe was an exception. In other words, they are protected from sin, but because of certain things that God wanted to use Moshe, like an example, whatever. So Moshe was an exception to the rule. Then if he's an exception to the rule, why you bring him in the Mishnah? So how do we understand this? Okay. Let's take a look at last week's Mishnah. You remember last week's Mishnah we talked about a machlokas l'shem shamayim, an argument for the sake of heaven? And we said an argument for the sake of heaven will endure, and an argument that's not for the sake of heaven will not endure. Why do we want any argument to endure? I don't care what the rationale behind the argument is. If you're having an argument, if you're having a machlokas, why do I want any machlokas to endure? That's problem number one. We say that Yisrael. I'm gonna throw in just a few little things now, and then tie everything together. We say that Yisrael ve'oraisa ve'kudsha brichu chadhu, the Jews, the Torah, and God are one. What exactly does that mean? Just the picture. What is that? What's it teaching me? That the Jews, the God, and Torah are one. So I think we have to understand that every Jew has a letter in the Torah. That our rabbis spend a lot of time on the concept. The Torah belongs to every single Jew. When God gave it, he gave it to every individual and the Jewish people in general. But the root of our neshama, of every Jew's neshama, is inside of the Torah, in a letter of the Torah. What exactly your letter is immaterial. At the end of the day, we say that our neshamos, our very souls, the very roots of our neshamos, are tied into every letter of the Torah, and every soul is sustained by a letter in the Torah, which means as follows: when a person sins and commits a transgression, goes against something in the Torah, then what's happening is that letter becomes impaired. That letter, some of it scratches off. It becomes unclear. But when a person sins in a great way, in a grand way, so then that letter becomes erased from the Torah. When you erase a letter from the Torah, the entire Torah becomes puzzle. the entire Torah isn't kosher. Because if you think about the ramifications of that, you have the word vayomer. You're missing the yud in the word vayomer. Well, not only is that word, that letter not there, but that word is really not there. And if that word is not there, then that whole sentence, that whole pasuk is like it's not there. And if that pasuk is not there, then that section of the Torah isn't there. If that section of the Torah isn't there, then that entire book of the Torah is not there. If that book of the Torah is not there, then the entire Torah is not there. One letter being erased has an effect on every other letter in the Torah. Now they're all there. You can read them, you can see them all, you can trace them, but it's like they're not there. It's as if they're, because you can't operate with that. You know, if you take War and Peace and leave out one word in a sentence, so you take that sentence doesn't make sense, nor does that chapter, nor does that entire book. One sentence, one letter, can have an effect on the entire thing. When there's machlokas, when there is dissension in the Jewish people, then there is that separation is not merely a separation between you and I. That separation on the root, on the soul level, means that our letter is wiped out of the Torah, because our letter disconnects itself from all the other letters. We live our lives on a very surface, a very material plane. When I'm arguing with you, what am I seeing? I'm seeing my body, me, my organism, fighting with your organism. But it's not that. The world exists on a much deeper plane. The world exists on a spiritual plane. And on the spiritual plane, what's happening is that if I'm not talking to you, that means that my letter is disconnecting from you. And if my letter, my ois, my connection to the root of the Jewish people is disconnected, so then I haven't merely just impaired myself, but I have impaired you also. A machlokas l'shem shamayim, an argument for the sake of heaven, is actually connecting letters to each other. It's connecting to the group, because I'm arguing with you in order to be able to strengthen our connections to Torah. You think it's this way, I think it's this way, but both of us are motivated by the desire to connect. That's not called a machlokas. We term it a machlokas Hashem Shemaim because you're saying yes, I'm saying no. You're saying it's okay, and I'm saying it's not okay. So that sounds like a machlokas. I'm arguing with you, and I'm saying to you, no, it's not that, it's that. But that's not an argument. That's an act of connection. Because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to reconnect myself. And if I'm trying to reconnect myself, I'm trying to reconnect you also. And if that's the case, then we're reconnecting everybody. And a machlokas l'shem shamayim is really an act of reconnection, not an act of disconnection. And that's why we say that a machlokas, that's for the sake of heaven, will endure. Will endure doesn't mean that the argument is going to endure. It means the Jewish people are going to endure, because every act of connection that we use, that we do, that we forge, that strengthens the Jewish people. And any machlokas that's not l'shem shamayim, any argument that is about some form of disconnection from the whole, then that ultimately will not endure, because the Jewish people won't endure that, because that will tear us apart and will render us useless because we don't have the whole. Take that principle and now bring that principle to this week's Mishnah. Kol mizaka es rabbim, anybody who is mizaka the rabbim, means that they are connecting people to God. A person who teaches Torah in public, a person who inspires people to raise their level of Judaism, a person who sets up institutions that people can benefit from it, a person who starts a tzedakah organization, a person who supports many other people, who collects money in order to be able to help other people. All of that is called mizakeh es harabim. That is an act of connection. When a person connects themselves to the community, when a person connects themselves to the Jewish people, so then that person, and we'll see why in a few minutes, but that person becomes protected. They enjoy a special protection because they become a part and a parcel of the community. I'll explain that in a second. But when a person is choto machti, sins and causes other people to sin, that's an act of disconnection. And an act of disconnection and destruction is going to be met with ultimate destruction. And that person will never be able to tshuva. The person will not be given the ability to be able to reconnect themselves back to the Jewish people, because that's what tshuva is. Tshuva is an act of reconnection. And they won't be given that advantage to be able to reconnect themselves. This is really the simcha, explains the joy on Simchas Torah. Because what is Simchas Torah? The whole year, when we do Averos, we do transgressions, what happens to us? We become disconnected from God and ultimately become disconnected from the Jewish people. Unwittingly, but that's what happens to us. And then on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we reconnect ourselves to God and we reconnect ourselves to the Jewish people through tshuva. Every letter reattaches itself, and then the Torah becomes whole. Torah becomes whole, and when the Torah becomes whole, the Jewish people become whole, and their relationship with God becomes whole. Torah, Kudsha Brichu, Oraisa, V'Yisrael Chadhu, we're one. The Jews, the Torah, and God. And that when we reconnect, we become one whole unit again. And when we're one whole unit, that brings a sense of simcha, a sense of joy. When I pick up that Torah on Simchas Torah, I'm picking up a whole Torah, because every Jew has reconnected themselves back. When we don't do tshuva, this is the way the Torah reads. Vayomer el da the in other words, you get a letter here, you get a letter there, you get a half a phrase here, but it's meaningless. On Simchas Torah, right after Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, that Torah is whole and healthy and powerful, because we have spent that time reconnecting ourselves and ultimately rehabilitating and rebuilding the Jewish people. That's the reason why some people before davening are makabel on themselves. They accept upon themselves the commandment of Yahavta l'reacha kamocha, of loving your neighbor as yourself. Because once I accept a connection to every other Jew, so then now I'm open to be able to receive the blessings from God, because now I am whole again. Zikoyes harabim, this concept of being mezaka, of giving an advantage to the rabbim, to the Jewish people, helps attach ourselves and attach others. When we attach, so then we become the tzibur. See, when I attach myself, then I'm an individual who's rehabilitated his relationship with God. But when I do something that helps you attach also, I've actually become a part and parcel of the tzibur, the community, the congregation of Israel. Because I wasn't just attaching myself, I'm the reason I'm putting back that missing yud. Because I'm not only attaching myself, but I'm attaching myself so that you can be attached also. And therefore I become not just somebody who helped the community. In essence, I have the strength of the community. A community at Tzibur enjoys a divine protection. Our prayers are not ignored. We are not looked at as individuals when we pray in a community. We're looked at as a community. Our strengths are added to other people's strengths, and our weaknesses become almost wiped out. When you daven alone, God has to look at you and say, do you deserve what you're asking for? And the merits that God is going to look at you, the backdrop is going to be your own life. But when you stand in a tzibur, you stand in a minyan, God looks at you and says, and even if you're not obligated to daven with that minyan. A woman is not obligated to daven in a minyan. If there's circumstances where a person doesn't have to daven with a minyan, but when they do, so God looks at a person not as an individual, but looks at a person, gives him the strength of the tzibur. When you're mizake as a rabbin, when you uplift other people, you are not an individual who has uplifted them. You are the tzibur. You are identified as the community because a lot of times in a shul, the shul is known by either the rabbi or it's known by the benefactor. Oh yeah, that's Goldberg's place, right? It knows if that's the person that built that built the shul, or that's the person that is the main supporter of the shul, it takes on the name of that person. Now, they're not the shul, they're not the community, they're not the school, but because they have caused it to happen, they become identified with it. And in spiritual terms, they enjoy the strength of that entire community. And that's why the Mishnah says that they are protected from sin. Because just like a community is protected, they become protected. In the same way, a person who's a machtias, a rabbin, a person causes other people to sin, what they're doing is they're separating not only their letter, but they're separating everybody's letters from their source. And when it is a total separation, it becomes harder for them to be able to climb out from it. So now comes the $1 million question. What about Moshe? If Moshe sinned and he became, if Moshe, I'm sorry. If Moshe was Mizaka the rabbin, then he should have had the protection of the rabbin. He should have had the protection of the community, of the congregation. How is it possible that Moshe sinned? So the simple answer is, I'm going to give you more elaborate in a second, but the simple answer is that he was afforded protection. Because could you imagine what would have happened to Moshe if he wasn't a protected species? What happened to Korach when he committed a fundamental transgression? In nanoseconds, he was swallowed by the ground. He was obliterated and wiped out. If the magnitude of Moshe's sin was such, as the way we understand it, of not speaking to the rock, but hitting the rock, if Moshe wasn't protected, Moshe would have been obliterated from the world. He would have been killed at that moment, and not all that time later. That would have been Moshe's end. But I want to give you what I think is a better answer. Moshe wasn't punished, and Moshe didn't sin. When Moshe spoke to the rock, it wasn't what God had commanded, but in the end, that wasn't the reason that he didn't go into the land of Israel. The reason that he didn't go into the land of Israel and take the Jews into the land of Israel is because Moshe Rabbeinu was not worthy. He was not wired to be able to take them in, and he proved that at the rock. God told Moshe to take the stick and go speak to the rock. So all the commentaries ask, why did God say take the stick and speak to the rock? Normally, when Moshe needed to get water from the rock, he took the stick, he hit the rock. If God wanted him to do something different now, why didn't he just tell him, go speak to the rock? Why take the stick and speak to the rock? Because the stick represented the old way of doing miracles. Now this was a brand new way. They were about to enter into the land of Israel, and this was a new way to go into to bring a miracle of speaking to the rock. So why did God tell him to take the stick? Because God wanted him to show a message to the Jews. There were miracles that were done. This is the old way of doing miracles. You take a stick, you pick up the stick, you split the sea. You pick up the stick, you perform the manna falls from the heavens. That's the old way of miracles. You're going into the land of Israel. Your existence is going to be different. Your relationship with me is going to be different, says God. Your ability to see me is going to be different. The way I perform miracles is going to be different. There's no more manna. You're going to have to eat apples and oranges. You're going to have to plant trees and you're going to have to reap trees. You're going to have to go and harvest. It's going to be a totally different existence. But I want the people to see the stick so they understand that this is the way it happened in the past, but that if you just open your eyes in the new way of life, you will still see me and you'll still see my miracles and it will be the same. The outer trappings will change, but the essence will be the same. And that was the message the Jewish people needed to hear on the eve of going into the land of Israel, because they were they never had to plant a tree. They never had to water a tree. They never had to cultivate a farm. They're going to have to do that now. And they have to still be able to see the presence of God. Moshe, when he couldn't perform the miracle with the stick, with his mouth, the new way of doing it, he reverted back to the old way. And he sent them the message that the old way, that's the only way. God said to Moshe, you can't take the people in. Because for them, they need to be guided and to learn this new system. That even when the miracles come in a different way without a stick, and they come from what's called natural, in a natural way, that God is still there. Moshe that wasn't considered Moshe's sin. And because it wasn't considered Moshe's sin, it was just that Moshe couldn't do it. He didn't have the strength to be able to change himself that way. And you can understand why that would be difficult. And therefore, a new leader had to be put over the Jewish people, and that was Joshua, Moshe's protege. And because of that, this dictum is still true. A mezakes harabim, somebody who does things for other people, so then that person is not going to be put into the clutches of sin. That's what happened to Moshe. Moshe was protected. He was a protected species. But even though he was a protected species, he nevertheless still couldn't be the one to bring the Jewish people into the land of Israel. Okay. One of the important things that comes out of the Mishnah is this notion that when you have other people in mind, when you do your stuff, and it's not about you, it's about strengthening other people, you are seen as a different human being. You're put in a different realm. When you worry about yourself only, and you don't worry about the effects that you have on other people, you become distanced to the extent that it's almost difficult to ever even climb out of that hole. Simply put, life is not just about us. It's not just about what's going to be best for me. We have to live our lives in a way that we have to worry about what's going to be best for others. And that even though for me, this might not be perfect, but if it's going to give you an advantage, if I can help you by doing this, so then that becomes the way that I should go, and that becomes what should be my focus. Not what's best for me, but what's best for us. Okay. Next Monday is pre-Pesach. Do a little of the usual, give some perspectives on the Seder, some ideas that you can share at your Seder. And I look forward to seeing everyone. Everybody should have a beautiful,
Thanks, everybody.
wonderful, amazing week.
Thank you.
Rabbi.
And it is always terrific to see everyone.
Rabbi, I have a quick question. I think it was about in maybe fall of 2018 or so, there was a speaker who spoke about the 10 Commandments. Do you remember who that would have been? He gave, I think it was even at your home. It was like a Friday night. We had a guest, a visiting rabbi. I mean, I'm virtually certain it was around 2018.
Not sure.
Does that ring a bell at all? It's fine. I mean, it's kind of a vague description, but
Yankee Horowitz, maybe?
I'm sorry?
Rabbi Horowitz, Rabbi Yaakov Horowitz?
Maybe I'll look it up.
Okay, I'm not sure. Okay.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi. Bye.
I'm
Have a
just
great
Good week.
I'm just going to grab my Gemara and we'll get started. Mark Brunswick, did anybody ever tell you? Mark, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Anybody tell you how many hits you got on your talk?
No,
you
probably none.
you beat Rabbi Fran by about 500. Yeah, I the last I checked, you're almost at 1,000.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. That's either means that every person in the shul listened to it 7 times.
Probably.
No, I
Or
think
my kids keep on clicking.
I think that because there are certain keywords in there, that it ended up going far beyond the shul. Yeah, it was fascinating. I just happened to be looking at it yesterday, and it was amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, shkoyach. I mean, that's like an amazing thing. It's beautiful. So Brunswick's gone viral.
Brunswick is a virus.
Well, you want to go viral. You don't want to be viral.
Okay.
Okay, we're holding on. Kuf Yud Dalet Amud Beis. 114. We're getting close to the end. Oh, let me do this. Let me end the recording.